Today we tell a story of fear, anguish, hopelessness, and despair, all leading to a miracle. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilley along with Rod Mullins, and this is Stories, a History of Appalachia. Now if you don't mind, go down below, click that subscribe button if you've not done so already, and ding the bell to get notified every time we have a new story out. And please give us a thumbs up too if you don't care.
Steve, what would a podcast like Stories, a History of Appalachia be without not including something from the Allegheny Mountains, which are couched inside of the Appalachians? But, you know, a lot of great history comes from the Allegheny Mountains out of Pennsylvania and the way that they run. A lot of good stories come out of there.
Yeah, and we have listeners up that way too, and, you know, they enjoy it. And, of course, as I said, when you get up above the Mason-Dixon line, it's no longer Appalachia, it's Appalachia.
Appalachia.
But we won't go there.
No, we won't go there. We won't have, and I'm saying this in all honesty, we will not have a Sharon McCrum moment here, okay? Because Sharon McCrum states it fact for fact, the reason why they call it Appalachia and the reason why they call it Appalachia, but we won't go there, so.
Okay. Well, many years ago in the Allegheny Mountains just east of Pittsburgh lived the Cox family. Samuel and Susanna Cox lived in a cabin near the forest, a forest that hadn't yet seen an industrial saw or a bulldozer, for the time of our story was the spring of 1856, and the town they lived in was Pavia. Samuel and Susanna were the proud parents of two little boys, George, age 6, and Joseph, age 5. Those two loved their parents, but their father especially, because like many other boys of this time, they loved to go with their dad on his hunts. That love of hunting would lead to tragedy.
Well, very early on the morning of April 24th, 1856, Mr. Cox was awoken by a dog who was out in the woods, and he was barking his head off at something. That something, thought Samuel, was probably a squirrel that the hound had treed. Well, he got up, pulled on his boots, and then put on his coat, and then grabbed his rifle. Then it was out the door to see what he and his dog could catch. Not long after that, though, Susanna got up, made the bed, put on her clothes, then went in to check on George and Joseph. When she noticed they weren't in bed, she wasn't too worried at first. She figured that the two had, probably heard their father leave out, and they wanted to go and, play some games or something like that. Just something to kind of pass the time, or they had gone with him by chance. Well, she went on about her chores and waiting for Samuel and her sons to return home later that morning. But when Samuel got back to the cabin, he was alone. It was then that they both realized to their horror that George and Samuel were missing. They ran outside and called for the two, but there were no replies.
Samuel ran to the neighbors' cabins looking for help. By that evening, he'd rounded up more than 100 men to search for the brothers. They lit fires in the woods as a beacon for the two, hoping they'd come to one of them. They looked all night, but to no avail. Well, the next day, the search party swelled to nearly 1,000 volunteers. That's nearly everyone in Pavia. They spent the day searching as well. They extended their search up to the swollen Bob's Creek, which was running high with spring snowmelt. Nobody thought that the two could have made it across to the other side, but the creek was searched anyway. No trace of the boys were found. By this time, the sentiment in the town started turning against Samuel and Susanna Cox. There were suspicions, Rod, that the two might have murdered their kids, then organized this fruitless search as a means of covering up the crime and of soliciting monetary donations from the crowd. The men searched the Cox cabin high and low but came up empty-handed. They then looked in the garden and all around the Cox property, but still found nothing. At this point, they did the only thing they could think of. They brought in a dowser and a witch.
The dowser used his dowsing rods to try to locate the children, but had no luck. The witch claimed to know exactly where the kids were and even led a search team to spot after spot after spot, but turned up nothing. She and the dowser, the witch that is, and the dowser were both sent away. Now, you'd think this was the end of the story, with the kids mysteriously disappearing forever. Well, you'd be wrong, wouldn't you, Steve?
Yeah, you certainly would. As the tale goes, a local farmer named Jacob Diebert heard about the missing children. He was touched at the plight of the family and the anguish they were going through, and he remarked to his wife that he wished he could help, maybe at least if he could dream of where the boys might be found. A few days later, he apparently got his wish. The night of May 2nd, Jacob went to bed as usual. That night, though, when Jacob fell asleep, he found himself in the woods outside Pavia. There he took a path through the woods and passed a dead deer. Then he found a child's shoe and came through a fallen birch tree. And there were the bodies of the Cox boys. Not only that, Rod, he had the same dream on May 3rd and May 4th. Obviously shaken, he confided to no one about his dreams except his wife. As he studied on it, he became troubled that maybe God had been trying to speak to him. So he decided to talk to someone about these dreams.
Well, on May 7th, he told his brother-in-law, Harrison Wysong. As Mr. Wysong listened to Jacob tell his story, something about the place he was describing sounded, familiar. The two men decided to do their own search, and as they went along the trails in the woods, they happened upon a dead deer, then a child's shoe, and finally a hollow fallen birch tree, inside of which were the remains of George and Joseph, and where they were found and where they lay. Now, it's said on that day that the boys' bodies that they were found, church and school bells from Pavia to Altoona started ringing and announcing the news. George and Joseph were buried in Mount Union Cemetery on May 8th, 1856, with 5,000 mourners, all in attendance, making it the largest funeral ever held in that part of Appalachia.
And on the 50th anniversary of the event in 1906, Pavia took up donations for a Lost Children of the Alleghenies monument to honor George, Joseph, and the Cox family. The monument was completed and erected in 1910 on the spot where the brothers were found back in 1856. How about that, Rod? I mean, that's one of those stories that just, to me, it sends shivers down your spine. That this guy
does.
Not only had one dream, but had three dreams, all of the same thing.
Yeah, and then how do you think that you would feel if you started coming across that dead deer and then the shoe and so forth? It's like, it's the thing of, that term, deja vu, is what it would seem like, at least. And I'm telling you, that does kind of send shivers up my spine, just kind of hearing about it, because, here was a man that didn't know the children, didn't know of them or anything, but it was revealed to him in a series of dreams that this is where the boys might be located, and, he decided to take a shot on it, and sure enough, he found out. Steve, this kind of reminds me of, I won't mention anything in particular, but kind of reminds me a little bit of a story that's kind of happening in Appalachia right now as we speak, of wondering where a young person might be, has kind of disappeared without a trace, and yet, here's somebody that had these dreams, and, it's one of those things, I guess, where you kind of don't want to turn your back on something like this, because you might be able to have the solution, or at least the vision, to maybe solve a case like this. Who knows?
Well, it's a matter of faith, and as I said at the beginning of this podcast, a miracle.
Right.
And that's the story of the Lost Children of the Alleghenies. Thanks for listening. You can subscribe to the Stories podcast at Apple Podcasts, Odyssey, Spotify, Audible, Stitcher, Google Podcast, or on your favorite podcast app. Again, thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.
So long.